everything that we've talked about in Pain Clinic up to this point and around this point is neurophysiological in nature. We're looking at this broad perspective that is the human experience of pain, and rehabilitation has a big component of that. Now, you will have also seen throughout your workbook and after this point a term called graded exposure, which is grounded in the field of psychology for fear and being able to expose yourself to something that you would be frightened of, like spiders is the example that we have in our workbook. But graded exposure is going to be something that also transcends into the physical movements that we're going to be exposing you to that you might also be frightened of for previous history of a bad experience, and or you haven't done it for a period of time. Okay, and what I'm talking about here is load management. And I'm going to draw a concept here because there's a new metaphor that we're going to be introducing called the envelope of function. Now, our bodies, my body, your body, is always trying to strike a balance. This balance is being struck all the time, not just in our bodies, outside of our body. An example would be the weather. If we have rain for a long period of time, then at some point that's going to balance out. Another example in my body that I like to be able to use is salt. Is it possible to have too little salt? Is it possible to have too much salt? There's a balance, and that's going to maybe change over time, but that balance is what is integral. And from a load perspective, this is what our tissues are always striving to be able to balance. The amount of load or force that's going through your muscles, through your bones, and through your joints. And I'm going to explore what that looks like for you now, and you're going to actually do this afterwards for yourself. But if I was to draw this on a graph, I could draw load on this axis going up this way. More load going up. I could do something that is load and more often, and I'm going to call it frequency. Okay, so this underneath this line here is everything that you are able to do. It's the fancy word we're talking about here is homeostasis, if you cast your mind back to when you maybe did biology in school, but the other word for homeostasis is balance, and that's how I want us to be able to frame it. Now, I'm going to draw some hypothetical examples on here, but if we were to think of a high load activity for you, a high force, but you're able to do it. And I'm going to give an example of a squat. So maybe you are able to squat 40 kilograms, okay? Barbell squat, and you could do it for 5 repetitions. I'm going to draw it on here. It's a high load, but it's underneath this line, which means that we are able to do it. We'll call it 10 kilograms for 5 reps. Okay, so if I was to take an activity that we can do much more of as it's a lower load, we'll say walking, and we'll put a distance on it that you're able to do no problem at the moment. So we could say 2 miles. Two-mile walk, okay? It's a lower load activity and it's further along the frequency because we can do it more often. Now, if I was to give you not 10 kilograms, so if that was 10 kilograms for 5 reps, if I was to give you not 10 but give you 20, this is all hypothetical by the way at this point, it would sit here, just outside this line that we are calling our envelope of function, that would require us to adapt in some way, get a little bit stronger, get a little bit stronger to be able to do that. Our body's having to adapt. Equally, if I did not 2 mile walk, but a 4 mile walk, as is in part of our walking program here, then it would be just outside the envelope, this line, that would require us to adapt in some way. And ultimately, the essence of programming, or the essence of being able to get fitter or stronger, is to be able to be pitching things just outside our current capacity or ability to be able to do, so that this line moves out, or it expands. You may have heard the idea of the envelope of function. If you've ever watched a commentator talk about someone who's in a marathon and they're really pushing their pace, and you might have heard them say, pushing the envelope. And that's really what this is building upon. And training, we want to be pitching just outside our capacity so our envelope expands. But here's an important point. So that was 20. If I didn't give you 20, so it was just outside your capacity, but I gave you 100, it might be so far outside your envelope of function that it would probably cause an injury, okay? So in terms of that as a load, it would be too much to do right now and would cause injury instantaneously, okay? Equally, if I didn't do a 4-mile walk, I said we're going to do a marathon. It would be so far out of our envelope of function that, again, it would probably cause injury. Now, here it might manifest in a couple of different ways. It might result in injury straight away, or what we might see is another expression of it, which would be that you start training for a marathon too quickly, and this builds up over a period of weeks where we exceeded our envelope of function, and then it might present as something called a repetitive strain injury, where it creeps up a little bit, but in essence, we have exceeded our capacity to be able to adapt. And that's exactly what this idea of an envelope of function is all about. It's about adaptability. Our body adapts to exactly what we ask it to. Your hands, if you do manual labor or if you start lifting things in the gym, will adapt by laying down hard skin exactly where you ask it to. It doesn't lay it down here, it doesn't lay it down here, it lays it down exactly where you stress it. Specific adaptation to the imposed demand, and that's what this is talking about. And what's really important here to be able to also illustrate is how, if this line can expand, what can it also do? Hopefully it becomes clear that this line also can shrink. And if we've not used a body part for a period of time, that will hopefully make sense as to what our envelope of function has potentially done for a particular task. An example or a metaphor that I use to help understand this is to think about astronauts when they go into space, because in space, what is there nothing of? There's no gravity, which means there's no load. So if you go into space travel, or if an astronaut goes into space travel for several months and then they come back, they literally have to learn to be able to walk again. Their bones, their muscles, their connective tissue, everything has adapted, not to lay down hard tissue, but to, the body's an amazing thing. It's saying, I'm not going to waste energy keeping all of those tissues. It will take it away. Use it or lose it. So what happens there is that an astronaut's envelope of function has literally come down to the point where they have to learn to be able to walk again, to be able to expand their envelope of function. So as a concept, this is important to understand that it is just a metaphor and it's a model, because there won't be an amount or an envelope of function. I won't be able to tell you what your envelope of function is for a particular task, but when you appreciate and understand it, and you can understand that we have an envelope of function for almost anything. Another example I will use to be able to think about this would be skin or sun exposure. I have white skin, I'm Welsh, it rains all the time in Wales, I don't see the sun very often. So is my envelope of function for sun exposure big or small? Hopefully you can pick up the analogy that my envelope of function for sun exposure, if I haven't seen the sun, is going to be small. What would happen if I was to go to a tropical country tomorrow where it's going to be 30 degrees? So you could probably draw my envelope of function for sun exposure down here, and then be able to paint what would happen if I was to go into 30 degrees tomorrow. I would probably burn. It would be outside of my capacity to be able to adapt. But would I be able to, over time, be able to incrementally expose myself to be able to tolerate 30 degrees in the sun. Okay, so you may say that, okay, I could do sunbeds or do something. I'm not going to comment on sunbeds, but maybe I could go on holiday and then I could incrementally spend 10 minutes in the sun, then 15 minutes in the sun to grade the exposure to increase my tolerance to be able to tolerate that. And that's a little bit, that's how I want you to be able to be thinking of this, because your goals and the movements that are important to you are also going to be somewhere out here, whether it is a marathon, whether it is to be able to get up and down from the floor. But we're going to want you to be able to draw how this might look for you, because those movements are going to be important that we need to be able to grade the exposure and get going towards. In this program, we have lots of movements to be able to support you through that, but we won't be able to give you these specific movements or tasks that are important and relevant for you. We have an envelope of function for sun exposure. We'll also have an envelope of function for everyday movements. You'll have an envelope of function for your ability to be able to simply bend down, the ability to be able to tolerate bending through the back, and even to be able to lift something up. That something could be incredibly heavy. You may have seen World Strongman where they're able to lift 150, 170 kilogram stones in this fully flexed position in the bottom of a squat, and then they're able to stand up. You know, do those people have more back problems than anybody else? Doesn't seem so. Is there envelope of function for being able to bend down and tolerate bending down, big or small? You know, it's arguably huge. And how has it got to that point? Slowly conditioned themselves to be able to tolerate that over time. We would have an envelope of function for being able to roll onto the outsides of our ankles. We would be able to, well, most people will have had some point in their life where they may have sprained their ankle by rolling on the outside. And then what unfortunately will happen is that we will then strap that up and then we will never go there again. That means our envelope of function for tolerating it, has it expanded or shrunk? Probably shrunk, meaning that we are more likely to be able to injure it again. Can we embrace and can we engage with conditioning that position out of alignment over time to be able to increase our capacity to be able to tolerate it if it does happen in everyday life, which it probably will. This is how we understand, and this is how we start to prime and build ourselves to be able to grade towards otherwise movements that otherwise look awkward or otherwise would be, you know, deviation from neutral. Being able to expose ourselves, our body is this amazing adaptable machine that we are able to condition our joints, be able to condition our spines, but we have to be able to do it slowly over time. So the tasks that we have for you this week, over and above actually engaging in the movement practices, which are going to be exposing you to these movements and expanding your envelope of function for some common things, I want you to be able to write down and explain what happens to an astronaut's muscles and bones when they go into gravity, when they go into space where they haven't got gravity. Because if we can do that, then we appreciate the importance of load and being able to incrementally increase the things that we can tolerate. Okay? The second task is going to be being able to try and write down how sun exposure might be a little bit like load management. And if you can remember and watch back my example here, white, Welsh, big or small envelope of function for sun. Could I grade towards being able to tolerate the sun? See if you can connect that to some important movements for you, which is your third task, to write down the movements that you maybe haven't been able to do for a period of time, to appreciate that if you haven't been doing those movements, whether it's getting up and down from the ground, whether it is lifting something up, you need to write those down and identify those to try and bring those into our movement sessions. Because then the final task is that I want you to watch this video back and try and paint the meaningful tasks for you and your envelope of function. Your goals will be on there. I've given an example of a squat here and walking. I want you to try and come up with a high load activity for yourself, which could be something in the gym. It could also be lifting up a household object. I want to be able to move a dressing table. That is a high load activity for you. Pop it on. Write down your goals, which may be outside your envelope of function, but this is going to help with engagement towards appreciating that your body does adapt. We need to figure out where you're at and then slowly, incrementally increase what we can do over time.